We're continuing our study of the book of Genesis. In our last sermon on Genesis, we examined chapter 1, where we were introduced to God and His creation of the universe. Chapter 1 tells us about the first day of creation, the day when God said, "Let there be light," and what happened? There was light. The world is much more cooperative than we are. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. On day 2, God created the atmosphere in which we live and birds fly. On day 3, God created the dry land and the plants that grow on that dry land. On day 4, God created the sun and the moon and the stars. On day 5, God created fish to inhabit the sea and birds to inhabit the atmosphere. On day 6, God created animals to live on the dry land, and He created the crown in His creation. He created man, the most disobedient of all His creatures. And finally, on day 7, God rested. He rested from this marvelous moment of time when God created the universe and everything in it. Chapter 1 of Genesis records the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them, but it only devotes 6 verses to the creation of the first man and the first woman. Chapter 2, on the other hand, is almost completely devoted to the creation of man. It is in chapter 2 that God gives us a more detailed description of how He went about creating the first man and the first woman, and how He blessed them and what He expected of them. Now, to fully understand what took place when God created the first man and the first woman, we need to combine the information we're given in chapter 1 with the information we're given in chapter 2. In combining the information given in these 2 chapters, we have a fairly complete picture of what took place when God created Adam and Eve. And the Lord willing, we will spend the next few weeks looking at some of these events that were so much a part of God's creation of man. And my prayer is that in doing so, we will gain a little more insight into who we are and what God expects of us and how we've been incredibly blessed. Let's begin with the Genesis account of chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 1, we are told that God created man in His own image and likeness. Verses 26 through 31. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over the earth, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. In telling us that man was created in the image and likeness of God, we're being told that among all of the creatures God made to live on this earth, man is very different and very special, because only man among all the creatures on this earth was created in the image and likeness of God. It is because we were created in the image and likeness of God that we are very different from all of the other forms of life on earth. Hodge wrote, "In making man after His own image, God endowed man with those attributes which belong to his own nature as a spirit. Man is thereby distinguished from all other inhabitants of this world and raised immeasurably above them. He belongs to the same order of being as God Himself, and is therefore capable of communion with His Maker. This conformity of nature between man and God is also the necessary condition for our capacity to know God, and therefore the foundation of our religious nature. If we were not like God, we could not know Him. We would be like beasts in the field that perish. If we were not like God, we could not know him. We would be like beasts in the field that perish. Very powerful statement and very true. Now, the reason God made us like himself was because only with a creature like himself could God have a deep and intimate relationship. If we were very much unlike God, we and God would not be able to have much of a relationship. We could have a relationship, it wouldn't be like much, wouldn't be very much. Think of it this way. How much of an intimate relationship can you have with a goldfish? Consider it a moment. Not much of an intimate relationship, I'm sure you've concluded by this point. Why? Because we and goldfish are very different. It's pretty much impossible to snuggle up to a goldfish. On the other hand, how much of an intimate relationship can we have with a dog? With a dog, we can do much better than we can with a goldfish. Why? The answer is very simple, because the differences between a human being and a dog are not as great as the differences between a human being and a goldfish. To put it another way, we're more like dogs than we are like goldfish. Though sometimes I wish we were more like goldfish, but that's another story for another day. Now, this is why we can have a more intimate relationship with the dog than we can with the goldfish. Still, as nice as dogs are, and I got to say something nice here because I have some dog lovers out there. Still, as nice as dogs are, there's a gap between ourselves and dogs. Not as great as the gap between us and goldfish, but there's still a gap. And even though we often have loving relationships with dogs, these relationships can't compare to the loving and intimate relationships we can have with other human beings. Why? Because other human beings are just like us. Now, the point I'm trying to make is obvious. The more another creature is like us, the deeper and more intimate the relationship we can have with that creature. And this is why God created us in his own image and likeness. This isn't an accidental, incidental thing. It's a major part of who we are. He created us in his own image because this would enable him to have a deep and intimate relationship with us, and to have a deep and intimate relationship with us is why God created us. I get this feeling sometimes that we evangelicals say that God created us because he has a bunch of rules and regulations he wants us to follow. It's like God was up in his heaven in eternity past and said, gee, I just want a bunch of people obeying rules and regulations, so let's create humankind and a religion with a bunch of rules for them to obey. Now, there are rules to obey, don't misunderstand. But we weren't created to obey rules. We were created to walk with God. That's the reason he made us in his own image. The reason for the rules and regulations is because they help show us how we should live so we can have an intimate and loving relationship with God. The question that naturally rises, however, when we proclaim that man was created in the image and likeness of God is this. How exactly are we like God? I don't feel like God. Do you feel particularly like God? The last time I tried to walk on water, it didn't work. We know, of course, that we are not like God in a lot of ways. For example, we're not omnipotent. That is, we're not all-powerful. We're not omniscient. That is, we're not all-knowing. We're not omnipresent. That is, we're not present everywhere in the universe at the same time. We also know that we are not like God physically because God is not physical. He is not material. Jesus said in John 4, God is spirit, and in Luke 24 he said, a spirit has not flesh and bones as you see me having. Now it's true that 2,000 years ago God became a man and took upon himself flesh and bone, but God in his natural state is spirit and does not have flesh and bone. All of this means that when God made us like himself, he did not make us like himself physically because he is not physical, but rather he made us like himself spiritually because he is spirit. This leads to the next question, which is this. How exactly are we like God spiritually? Even this we don't understand completely, but we do know that there are a number of ways in which we are like God spiritually. For example, We are like God intellectually. We are like God intellectually. That is, God gave us the ability to think in much the same way that He thinks. It is because God gave us the ability to think in much the same way that He thinks that we can have meaningful and thoughtful conversations with God. If we didn't think in much the same way that God thinks, meaningful conversations with God would be impossible. We are like God intellectually. Not as smart, to be sure, but we think in the same way. We understand cause and effect. We understand things like that. So we can communicate in a meaningful way. We're also like God emotionally. That is, we have the ability to feel in much the same way that God feels. This means that when God talks about loving, we know what He's talking about because we know what it is to love. When God talks about hate, we know what He's talking about because we know what it is to hate. When God talks about anger, we know what He's talking about because we know what it is to be angry. We are like God intellectually, we are like God emotionally, and we're like God volitionally. That is, God gave us free will. God gave us the ability to choose what we want to do because God has the ability to choose what He wants to do. When God made us like Himself, He also made us like Himself socially. That is, He gave us the desire to be with other people. God made us like Himself socially because God is a social being in which the members of the Trinity have perfect relationship with each other. They want to be with each other, and they also want to include us in their mutual fellowship. What a joy, what an honor, what a privilege to be part of that mutual relationship. We're going to enjoy that for eternity. Well, I don't think we even begin to fully appreciate it now, but one day we will. And that's going to be the high point of eternity, there, having fellowship with God. Finally, when God made us like Himself, He made us like Himself morally. He made us like Himself morally. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, we're told that when God made us, He made us upright. He made us morally upright because He is morally upright, and only with morally upright human beings can God have an intimate and loving relationship. There are, of course, a number of other ways in which God made us like Himself, but you get the idea. And it's important to know this because being made in the image and likeness of God is an extraordinary gift God has given to each of us. It is a gift that separates us from all other creatures on earth. It is a gift that not only enables us to have a deep and intimate and loving relationship with God, it is also a gift that demands that we have a deep and loving and intimate relationship with God. There's something else you need to understand about being made in the image and likeness of God, and that is this. It is because we have been made in the image and likeness of God that it is outrageously sinful to murder another human being. It is outrageously sinful to murder another human being. God's image in man is the basis for God's prohibition against murder. God views His image in man as being so sacred that He demands that we not destroy it. To murder another human being is to attack the image of God that is in that human being. And God has prohibited us from doing this, and this prohibition could not be more clear. Commandment number 6, thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not murder. Furthermore, if a man refuses to obey this commandment and dares to murder another human being, God considers this offense so great that He demands that the murderer be executed. Genesis chapter 9. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God is God made man. Now, at this point, some of you are probably wondering how this prohibition against murder harmonizes with God's command that nations execute certain criminals and that Israel and other nations go to war. The answer to these questions about harmonizing the sixth commandment with God's commands that certain criminals be executed and that Israel and other nations go to war is found in a better understanding of the sixth commandment itself. The sixth commandment is a commandment that prohibits murder, not killing. It prohibits murder, not killing. The scriptures make it clear that not all killing is murder. And God's prohibition in the sixth commandment is against murder, not killing. There is unlawful killing, which is murder, and there is lawful killing, which is not murder. And God tells us what is lawful and what is unlawful. Now, to better understand this, we need to look at two Hebrew words used for killing. One Hebrew word used for killing is the Hebrew word ratzah. My pronunciation stinks. David will correct me after the sermon. His Hebrew is good. One Hebrew word used for killing is the Hebrew word ratzah. This is the word that is used for an unlawful killing. This is the word that is used in the sixth commandment, and it is properly translated murder. Thou shalt not murder. You shall not ratzah. This is the sort of killing that takes place when a man murders his neighbor in much the same way as Cain murdered his brother Abel. That was murder. That was ratzah. The second Hebrew word used for killing is the Hebrew word harag. This word is used for a lawful killing. This is the sort of killing that takes place when a judge orders the execution of a criminal. This is the sort of killing that takes place when men go to war. The sixth commandment does not prohibit this sort of killing. So to summarize, in Hebrew there are two words that are used for killing another human being. One word speaks of a lawful killing, and the other speaks of an unlawful killing. In the sixth commandment, God is prohibiting the unlawful taking of a human life, not the lawful taking of a human life. Now, there's something else you need to understand about the sixth commandment. The sixth commandment is directed primarily at individuals, not nations. There's a big difference between the two. In the sixth commandment, God is telling individuals that they do not have the authority to kill another human being. God is not telling societies that they do not have the authority to kill other human beings. In fact, it's just the opposite. God has commanded that societies execute certain criminals, and he has directed nations to go to war. Genesis 9:6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. Exodus 21, verses 12 through 16. Anyone who strikes a man and kills him shall surely be put to death. Anyone who attacks his father or mother must be put to death. Anyone who kidnaps another and either sells him or still has him when he is caught must be put to death. So God clearly sanctions executing certain criminals. And he's given that sanction to societies. Not only did God ordain capital punishment, God demanded that the Israelites go to war. Deuteronomy chapter 20. God said, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. God has prohibited unlawful killing, and God has demanded lawful killing. The state has a lawful right from God, even a mandate, to execute certain criminals. The state also has a lawful right from God to go to war to protect life by taking life. On the other hand, individuals do not have a lawful right to kill their neighbors. Human life is sacred, and no individual has the right to murder his neighbor. Now, all of this raises some interesting questions. If human life is sacred, why does God allow and even demand that some criminals be executed? And also, if human life is sacred, why does God allow and even demand that nations go to war? Let me try and answer these questions. To begin with, God allows soldiers to go to war and kill other soldiers because he recognizes that in this fallen world, nations must go to war and take life to protect life. If God did not allow nations to protect themselves, evil would triumph even more than it already has. Please note, however, this is not permission for powerful nations to trample on weak nations, but this is permission for nations to raise up armies to protect themselves. God also allows for capital punishment. In fact, God even demands it. And I've heard clergymen say that capital punishment, execution of criminals, is incompatible with Scripture. It is not incompatible with Scripture. In fact, God demands it. He demands it because he recognizes that in this fallen world, men will break his commandments and do wicked things. And God is determined to punish those who do wicked things. And punishment is a deterrent that warns others against doing wicked things. When God commanded that murderers be executed, he was not diminishing the value of human life, as some suggest. He was not diminishing the value of human life, as some suggest. He was doing just the opposite. In commanding that murderers be executed, God was affirming the awesome value of human life. He was saying, in effect, that if you dare to take this precious and sacred thing called human life, then you will forfeit your own life. It's not a diminution of the value of human life when God demands that we execute murderers. It's just the opposite. If you dare to take human life, you forfeit your own. To attack another human being is to attack the image and likeness of God in that human being, and this God does not permit. Among all of the creatures God created and placed on this planet, we human beings are the only creatures God made in his own image and likeness. And this is what makes us special. This is what makes human life sacred. This is the great distinction between human beings and all of the other creatures God made and placed on this earth. One of the great tragedies of the 20th and 21st centuries is that this distinction is being eroded in our godless society. There are animal rights activists who argue that there are no distinctions between human beings and the rest of the animals on the earth. One animal rights activist went so far as to say that if he and his son and their pet dog were stranded together in a boat on the ocean with only enough water for two of them, he would have a hard time deciding who to throw overboard, his son or his pet dog. And that's true. He wrote a book on it. Another animal rights activist, her name is Ingrid Newkirk. She was the national director of PETA. She said this: animal liberationists do not separate out the human animal. So there is no rational basis for saying that a human being has special rights. She continues, a rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy. They're all mammals. This isn't just a little problem in our society. This is gigantic, folks. Many animal rights activists are blind to the profound distinctions between human beings and the rest of the animal world. And they're blind to it because they have embraced evolution, and evolution makes no distinction between the worth of human beings and the worth of the rest of the animal world. Many animal rights activists are blind to the profound distinctions between human beings and the rest of the animal world because they have rejected what God has said about creating human beings in his own image. And when men reject this great truth, they fail to understand and appreciate the sacredness of human life. Understand this. If life evolved, then there is no sacredness to life. If life evolved, there is no sacredness to life. If life evolved, then all we can point to are the different forms life can take. For example, some animals are small, some are large, some are smart, some are not so smart. Some can fly, some can swim, some can only live on the land. Some are dominant, some are recessive. Lots of differences if we evolved, but no sacredness. To be sacred means to be set apart for divine purposes. To be sacred means to be set apart for divine purposes. And that is exactly what God did when he created us in his own image. He set us apart for divine purposes. He created us to walk with him in the cool of the day, and that makes us sacred. Societies that embrace evolution and reject creationism have no basis for believing in the sacredness of life, which is why it is so easy for them to accept abortion or euthanasia or embryonic cell research and so many of the other terrible things we have done to human life in the 20th and 21st centuries. How sad that so many men and women are unaware of this incredible gift that God has given to us and us alone. The gift of being created in the image and likeness of God is a gift that makes it possible for human beings to walk with God intimately and lovingly and walk with him forever. That's the great blessing, friends. If we weren't created in the image of God, that would be essentially impossible. It would be like trying to snuggle up to a goldfish. But we don't. God isn't snuggling up to goldfish. He's snuggling up to men and women he made to be like himself, in his likeness, in his image, and it is one of our greatest privileges and blessings. Rejoice in it, and keep in mind how sacred human life is. What a blessing. What a blessing. Father, thank you so much for making us like yourself, for giving us this glorious opportunity to walk with you in the cool of the day, to know you and to love you and to be able to talk with you and feel the way you feel. We're eager for the day we'll put our old sin natures behind us and be able to walk with you as we should. In the meantime, I pray, Lord, you would encourage us to live lives that are pleasing to you, and in doing so, we can walk with you more intimately and more lovingly. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.